Capitalist. Today we're doing a kind of a special edition called What the Election Teaches About Polarization and Holism. The reason I'm doing this video is that I'm watching so many postings and reactions to postings right now about the election. Dear friends that I love are expressing their heartfelt fear because of things they believe about President-elect Trump. This fear seems to center around the impressions created during the campaign that progressive social values around gender, race, and LGBTQ communities will roll back to a less inclusive, and we would argue, a less holistic time. Other dear friends of mine that I also love are being emotionally hooked by these fear reactions because they supported Trump's populist agenda over his personal weaknesses and were experiencing a release of their heartfelt fear they had about President Obama for the last 8 years. They saw a shift in nationalism towards an embrace of globalization in a way that appeared to be at the expense of themselves and their children in a very real way to them. Now, on the eve of what they perceive as victory and change, the bitter taste of fear is rekindled. This may at first seem to be a little off topic for the holistic capitalist. We certainly don't intend to become a political blog. However, the community is part of our model, and the political community must be explored in the new paradigm of holistic capitalism. Personal experience with polarization, whether within ourselves or between ourselves and our employees, between teams, functions, or even between our organization and our customers, are all germane topics. And the election is just too rich and too full of learnings about polarization not to make some observations that we can learn from. Now, fear is an adaptive response to a perceived threat. It is a bias. Now, let me correct that. It's way more than a bias. It is an autonomically programmed fight or flight reaction. That's because there just isn't time for analysis or fact-checking or healthy debate or even dialogue, as much as it really pains me to say that, in an immediate threat situation. Fear hedges its bet by immediately projecting the very worst that might happen as simply as possible and acting on that simple projection right now in order to survive. And we should all be glad that it does. Probably all of our ancestors successfully used this fight or flight reaction many times. And if they hadn't, we wouldn't actually be standing here today. You actually need polarization in an immediate threat situation. Say you're alone on a dark street late at night, and maybe there's a potential mugger, or you're lost out in the woods and encountering a bear. You see, us versus them in that moment is fast, efficient, and may allow you to survive the encounter. So what happens? The cerebral cortex, the higher brain, literally shuts down in a fear or threat situation. It's just in the way in a fear situation. You don't need it. The base brain and midbrain are, however, in very high gear. They control things like the blood flow of the body, which will reroute and engorge muscles in the arms and legs, while perhaps restricting blood flow to places like the digestive system, things that we just don't need in that fear moment. Now, what if the situation doesn't subside because it's a social event and not a bear in the woods. When fear neurotransmitters trigger a brain part called the amygdala for too long and too often, it just goes on and on, the neurotransmitters don't clear the brain completely. We can be caught in a fear loop in which we literally start reprogramming our mind to the efficient but very limited black and white projections of our own thoughts in those circumstances. And over and over and over again, we project our imagination of the worst thing that might happen. And so pretty soon it becomes a habit and can even become a dominant attitude, more akin to an addiction. Now let's turn the dial just a bit deeper here and look at the normal process of how experience to concept structures are built in our minds. I subscribe primarily to the psychology of Carl Jung, who taught that completeness and wholeness is the natural striving of our psyche. Well, that is, as long as the natural striving towards wholeness hasn't been impeded or blocked or damned in some way. Keeping this as simple as I can, when a significant life event happens, we attach an image and an emotion to it. Now that image and emotion gets matched up to other experiences, images, and emotions. It's actually a brain part called the hippocampus that's very involved in that. Now, these eventually settle as a simplified concept that lets us be very efficient when a similar life event comes along. It literally is one of the building blocks that form our personality. This process is going on very actively in the teenage years and into young adulthood. Once we've built enough of these conceptual structures, we can just plug into the appropriate experience to concept structure when it's needed. It's who we are, or so it seems. One of the metaphors I've learned and used throughout my career is that it's a little bit like the map versus the territory. No map ever captures the actual terrain completely or accurately. But maps are very nice to have when you can't see what's coming over the next hill, or better when you're planning an expedition and deciding what gear you will need to take. The difficulty in human perception, or polarities, is that we tend to lose perspective about the difference between the map and that actual territory. The longer we go without expanding ourselves towards more completeness and holism, the more rigid the concept becomes and the more blind to the map-territory difference we tend to get. We literally lose track of the difference between our concepts of the world and the actual world. Dialogue between polarities creates holism precisely because it adds perspective and helps us see the difference between our map and the actual territory of any given situation when we kind of get carried away with it. Now let me calibrate here. All of this that we've been talking about is what Jung taught happens in the normal development of mental structures. So what I want to do now is turn the dial even one more step deeper to see what happens to this normal process under the situation of great fear and stress. When one of those life experiences involves fear or trauma, the very survival programming we rely on makes it inevitable that the concept we settle on will be the simplest kind of concept of all, and the most blind to the difference between the map and the territory. It just doesn't have time for those kinds of distinctions. We call this most simple and most blind concept a stereotype. And stereotypes are always wrong, or at least they're always very limited as a map of the territory. You don't need a complicated map in an emergency. Now let me see if I can illustrate this. Let's take case one and say that I'm one of the populists who felt left behind during the Obama administration and voted for Trump. I'm going to try to step into that character. It is literally inexplicable to me. I can't even imagine why President Obama did some of the things he has done. My fear that he will move the country to a socialist agenda is growing quickly, and I think is being affirmed. Now, let's step out of character for a moment to notice the ready-made concept of a socialist agenda. Whatever that means to me in my map, I instantly plug into that. Okay, so I'll try to go back into character. Obama seems to suck up to Islam over us. And on my map, he is going around the world being soft on terrorism and apologizing for us. And in the meantime, won't even say the words radical Islamic terrorist. Stepping out of character again. Now observe in this next set the oversimplified fight or flight stereotype kicking in to simplify and polarize as the higher cerebral cortex shuts down. Hey, maybe he really is a terrorist sympathizer. Maybe we've actually had a coup in this country and didn't even know it. He sends a plane load of cash to Iran on a nuclear deal, and now I'm sure he is selling out America. He talks of colonialism, and that tells me that this is an anti-American move. Now, can we know that President Obama is a terrorist sympathizer who has sold out America? Can we absolutely know that's true? If you cannot see that the answer is a resounding no, you are probably stuck in a fear loop right now as you listen to this video. The problem is, this stereotype is just way too simple, and it isn't objectively true. But out of fear, our experience to concept attachment became fixed, so this person did not expand and didn't build a new level of holism. To see my own dialogical approach to soften this stereotype, see my YouTube video called Obama Revealed. Let's move to case 2. Okay, this time I'll try to adopt the character of a socially progressive Democrat. Now, I've built a map of the territory out of my experience to concept attachments, and they're different. Let's say I'm also a woman and perhaps I'm a Muslim or Hispanic. I'm not a very good actor, but I'll try to get into character. Did you see that video of Donald Trump displaying completely deplorable misogynistic objectification towards women? And I hear the press say over and over that Trump thinks all Muslims should be banned and all Mexicans are rapists and criminals. And I'm afraid. I have daughters. I don't want them being raised in that environment. I'm convinced that Trump is a complete racist, bigoted person who hates Muslims and Hispanics and blacks and Jews and disrespects women. And he is going to take the country backward, erasing 30 years of social progress towards equality for these people. In fact, the more I think about it, that sounds like Hitler. oh my God, Trump is the next Hitler. Okay, I'm not going to win any Oscars. But we have to ask the question now. Can we absolutely know it is true that Trump is a racist, xenophobic misogynist that will reverse social policies and progress? The literal second coming of Hitler? Again, if you can't see that the answer is a resounding no, you probably are caught in a fear loop, even as you watch this video. As before, this stereotype is way too simple and isn't objectively true. I'm not going to undertake a rules of evidence-based analysis of this stereotype here in this video, but just a few minutes of even cursory direct source research shows that it doesn't hold up. While there is very clear evidence of a past misogynistic playboy lifestyle for sure, this apparently did not spill over into his company policies, for example. After that, little else can be established to support this level of stereotype. Even if you don't like Mr. Trump, that's okay. But this stereotype is completely simplified and exaggerated. Now, I hope these case examples illustrate how the normal experience to concept structures form into stereotypes under the fear of a perceived threat. A detailed exploration of how consultants like me help people develop a less fear-based, more elaborate and holistic thought process is beyond the scope of this video, but I will have a few things to say about it. It's called dialogical thinking, and it is a learnable technique for building the pattern into your mind to imagine the other side of a polarity as reasonable to them before you get stuck in a loop. And you think that you may have been stuck in a loop already? Well, then you can use the same technique to reprogram your mind and begin to expand towards holism and completeness. Now, beyond dialogical thinking lies true dialogue. With highly developed skill or professional facilitation, dialogue can literally create holism from these polarities. And that holism is personal expansion, in contrast to looping over and over and over again. I want to make a key point here. Dialogue does not mean complete capitulation to the other side of the polarity, not in any sense. But it does have the power to expand our minds to a holism beyond the previous polarities. In capitalism, we call that holism perhaps a positive culture, or team spirit, or a brand that's based on customers who are raving fans. Look for future videos explaining dialogue at length as a vehicle for creating holistic capitalism. In the future, I may also add to a series of videos that I've called Dialogical Exercises to illustrate how I think what I think about President Trump that can go far beyond the simple stereotypes that we've created in this illustration, like I've already done with President Obama. Now, this is important. I want to emphasize that right now, those hurting so deeply over the election or the posts and violent protests to the elections, the only thing to do for them is to validate their heartfelt fears. Carl Jung taught that nothing in our unconscious is there to hurt us or is bad when integrated into a complete personality. But when we feel afraid or have been repeatedly traumatized, There are parts of us that can become monsters. Indeed, monsters ready for fight or flight. And frankly, we're seeing a lot of monsters right now in people who normally are more controlled, rational, and, well, just usually walking around with a lot better, a lot more complex maps than they are right now. Carl Jung also taught something that, for me, is very hopeful. When these threatened or repressed parts of us are unconditionally validated, the monster shrinks back to normal. They always do. Always. And when they do, they actually contribute their part towards the expansion, or the expansion towards holism within each of us. If nothing else, they give us the insight in a dialogue to imagine the other person and how they may be trapped at this point in a loop. Now, in closing, I want to send my love to those dear friends who are afraid and hurting from the election. And I also want to send my love to those dear friends who are afraid and hurting from the reactions to the election. You see, the process going on for each group is the same. Now, if you come to realize at some point, perhaps through this video, that you're getting stuck in the fear loop and need help reprogramming out of it, please leave a comment here or on my website. I'm aware of several techniques that might help, and I could cover these in future videos. I haven't really been planning on doing those at this stage of developing this channel, but I could move that forward if there's a need. Until then, let me close with a mantra from a loving kindness meditation. May you be well in your physical being. May you be happy in your life's challenges. And may you be without suffering in your heart and mind. Until next time, be well.